We've discussed in previous cases about an angel of death and why they are referred to that. If you're just listening for the first time, an angel of death is a nurse or doctor, usually a nurse, that kills their patients or patients that they acquire and become serial killers. They do it as a savior complex or for other reasons. Some get the thrill of being in the medical emergency, and then they get the thrill of saving them. Others get the rush of starting the emergency and then being consumed into it, as it usually is an all-hands-on-deck type of situation, especially with codes. Then you have the ones that have the savior complex, where they'll start the emergency, be the one that finds them, and the one that saves them. Welcome to the campfire. Grab your s'mores and grab a seat. Thanks for joining me tonight around the fire as we discuss the dark world of true crime. I am your host, Kevin. This is the Campfire Crime Chronicles, a true crime podcast. And this is the case of the Texas killer nurse. So this week's case was requested whenever I did the episode 7 case of Rita Mays, who is also an angel of death. So if you haven't listened to episode 7 yet, make sure you go and check that one out. That angel of death takes place in Clarksburg, West Virginia. Before we get into the case tonight, I want to thank the show's sponsor, BetterHelp, for helping keep the flame lit of the campfire for this episode. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service that's 100% online. So you don't have that awkwardness of sitting in a waiting room with a whole bunch of other strangers waiting to see your therapist. With BetterHelp, you have access to a network of over 25,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with whatever you're dealing with. All you have to do to get started is answer some questions about what your needs and preferences are in therapy. So that way, BetterHelp can match you with a therapist that is right for you. And if you want to change your therapist because maybe you're not comfortable with them, you can change your therapist at any time for no additional charge. You also don't have to wait any specific time or any number of sessions to change your therapist. So when you match up with that right therapist, you can talk to your therapist however is most comfortable for you, whether it's text, chat, phone, or video. You can also message your therapist at any time and schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you and your schedule. With BetterHelp, you get the same professionalism and quality you expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist who is custom-picked for you, with more scheduling flexibility and more affordable prices. So if you go to the website and use the show's code, betterhelp.com/CCC, not only does that let them know that you heard it at the campfire, but you'll also receive 10% off your first month. So that's betterhelp.com/CCC. BetterHelp, HELP.com/CCC. We start tonight's case with going back in time with our DeLorean and flux capacitor, starting at 1950. Born July 13th, 1950, like many children and infants, Janine Jones was immediately adopted by a couple, Dick and Glady Jones, who took in children as Janine would make the fourth child that they had adopted. Dick was a gambler and serial entrepreneur who started first opening a nightclub, then a restaurant, then would follow with a billboard business. All these businesses would fail because Dick had a habit of spending every dollar that was brought in instead of putting it back into the business. This would cause much added stress on the family. Janine often felt left out as well as lacking approval by her parents, which in turn she would continually feign illness so that she would attract and receive attention. She was often alone and overweight. She would gain the reputation as being aggressive as well as lying. This led to her also manipulating and betraying people. Janine would experience death for the first time in her teenage years, the first being the sudden death of her younger brother Travis, who was 14 and died from an accident. The following year, her father would die of cancer, Both of these deaths would leave her devastated. While still in high school, she was seeking security and was wanting to marry, meeting opposition from her mother, Glady, saying that it was too early for her to marry since she hadn't even graduated high school yet. After her completion and graduating from John Marshall High School, she would marry high school dropout James Jimmy Harvey Delaney Jr. 7 months after being married, Jimmy would join the Navy. While being on deployment, Janine had a large sex drive and would have multiple affairs and would even brag about them. When Jimmy returned, the two would have a child, Richard Michael Delaney. However, only 4 years later, Janine and Jimmy would divorce, June 3rd, 1974. The two would reconcile for a time before finally parting and going their separate ways. However, while they had their brief period of being together, their second child would be conceived and was born July 17th, 1977. However, Janine would leave both of her children under the care of her mother. So at around this time, Janine's mother would talk to her about getting into a career and becoming financially stable and being able to provide for herself and presumably her children, because that's what normal people do. So Janine would attend Mims Beauty School training as a beautician and begin working at the beauty salon located in San Antonio Methodist Hospital. So if you haven't figured it out by now, you can probably see where this is starting to go. So after working there and being attracted to the doctors at the hospital as well as the low pay that she was receiving as a beautician, she would transfer to being a licensed vocational nurse, or an LVN. An LVN was under an RN, which is a registered nurse, which would equate to the modern day LPN, which is a licensed practical nurse. Jones would receive her LVN training at San Antonio Independent School District School of Vocational Nursing. She began her nursing career in 1977. Her first job as an LVN was in the Methodist Hospital, which was short-lived as she would routinely disobey orders by the doctors, as well as skip out on mandatory training and being rude to the patients. She would be fired just after 8 months of employment as an LVN. On October 30th, 1978, she would begin working at Bexar County Medical Center Hospital in their pediatric ICU, much like her position at Methodist. Although while at Bexar County, she would again prove that she is not a well-disciplined employee, as she would begin disobeying orders and would do what she thought was best for the patient. She would also spend more time than required on her LVN duties. The trend didn't stop there though. Much like at Methodist, where she skipped out on her classes, she also skipped out on mandatory classes at Bexar also. She would be observed administering the wrong medication to patients, along with other errors that she was doing in her nursing. So she probably should have gone to at least some of those training classes. Jones would end up being fired at Bexar County. However, the head nurse, Pat Pelko, had a strong fondness for Jones. This protection from Belko would make Jones willful and gain confidence, which would cause Jones to become aggressive. This attitude of Jones's would cause other colleagues to request transfers out of the ward. So Jones often believed that she was sick and would make more than 30 visits to outpatient clinics over the course of 2 years. So we can see that her behavior from her childhood as a teenager seeking out attention did not change at all. So people who constantly believe that they're sick and constantly going to the doctor or make up some excuse that they're sick, we call those people hypochondriacs. During my time as an EMT on an ambulance, I saw many of those people who were hypochondriacs. Now, yes, I know I wasn't a doctor and couldn't diagnose them as such, but when you pick them up every day for the same thing and there is absolutely nothing wrong with them, nothing on the monitors, nothing on their vitals showing any kinds of signs, and then when you go to pick them up from the hospital or they show you the doctor's reports from the previous day and you see that there was nothing wrong and the doctor clearly stated nothing was found wrong with this person, then it's safe to say, yes, that person is a hypochondriac. So in 1981, James Robotham became the director of Bear Hospital. James admired Jones's passion for nursing and would approve her request to become in charge of the extremely ill patients. So then when patients started dying on Jones's shifts, she would go out of her way to take care of the bodies of the deceased children. This would impress Dr. Robotham so much that he wouldn't even become alarmed when children would start dying from non-fatal conditions. It was almost like he put the blinders on and didn't even put two and two together that children were dying suspiciously while Janine was on shift. So it wouldn't even take long for her colleagues to notice that children began dying on her shift and would ultimately call Janine's shift the death shift because of the number of children that were dying while under her care. So you would think if Robotham wasn't aware of it by now, you'd think he would have gotten a clue at this point. But he didn't. It was almost like Jones was a witch and had a spell over him. Jones would play a heavy empathy card that would give the impression that the deaths she was causing were affecting her heavily and emotionally. One doctor would go to say, and quoted by Texas Monthly, it wasn't unheard of to see Janine crying at the end of her shifts, asking, why do babies always die when I'm around? End quote. It would be reported that Janine would hold and sing to her deceased patients long after they had already passed. My guess is to probably keep suspicion off of her that she was the one causing all these deaths. It wouldn't be until 3 infants would die from drug overdoses that would start raising concerns and alarms with the hospital's administration. It only took that long for them to be like, oh, maybe we should look into this. So there was even a co-worker that would accuse Jones of murdering the children. However, Robotham would request that a formal inquiry into Jones be turned down because he feared that the investigation would bring bad publicity to the unit and the hospital. Instead of firing just Jones, the hospital fired the entire LVN staff of the ward, as well as changing the name entirely of the hospital. Then they even offered Jones a transfer out of the ward, but a position still within the hospital. Janine's response to transfer to another ward was resigning from the hospital altogether. Her resignation didn't come with consequence, however. She received letters of recommendation from her supervisors that would help her secure a new position in a clinic relatively quickly. I want to thank the show's sponsor, BetterHelp, for helping keep the flame lit of the campfire for this episode. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service that's 100% online. So you don't have that awkwardness of sitting in a waiting room with a whole bunch of other strangers waiting to see your therapist. With BetterHelp, you have access to a network of over 25,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with whatever you're dealing with. All you have to do to get started is answer some questions about what your needs and preferences are in therapy. So that way, BetterHelp can match you with a therapist that is right for you. And if you want to change your therapist because maybe you're not comfortable with them, you can change your therapist at any time for no additional charge. You also don't have to wait any specific time or any number of sessions to change your therapist. So when you match up with that right therapist, you can talk to your therapist however is most comfortable for you, whether it's text, chat, phone, or video. You can also message your therapist at any time and schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you and your schedule. With BetterHelp, you get the same professionalism and quality you expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist who is custom-picked for you, with more scheduling flexibility and more affordable prices. So if you go to the website and use the show's code, betterhelp.com/CCC, not only does that let them know that you heard it at the campfire, but you'll also receive 10% off your first month. So that's betterhelp.com/CCC. BetterHelp, HELP.com/CCC. So in 1982, a doctor in Kerrville, Texas, was opening a pediatric clinic. Her name was Kathleen Holland, who did her 3-year residency at Bexar County Medical Center. She would hire Janine Jones for her new clinic despite the investigation at Bexar that she was well aware of that was going on. So after Janine left Bexar County, it was pretty obvious that the deaths would stop occurring and things would return back to normal. Dr. Holland would receive warnings from Dr. Rothfussum about Janine, and Janine would waste no time at the clinic, and within the first few months of being there, it was reported that as many 7 children would suffer unexplained seizures. However, all 7 would recover after receiving treatment at St. Peterson Hospital. Dr. Holland would become concerned and suspicious, however, assumed that because she was a specialist was brought the worst cases. It wouldn't be until the death of one of her patients that Dr. Holland would begin investigating. At least she had the brains to start investigating immediately after the first death and didn't wait for several. So good on her, Dr. Holland. A medical committee during the investigation would question Dr. Holland about her use of succinylcholine. So I know I probably butchered the pronunciation of that medication, so all my listeners who are in the medical field and are very well versed in medications, don't feel like you have to give me a lecture on the pronunciation of that medication. Thanks in advance. So anyway, that medication is used as a muscle relaxant that can have potentially fatal consequences when administered inappropriately. An inventory check that would be done September 27th, 1982, which would show 2 full bottles of the medication. However, when a closer look of the true inventory would show that one of those bottles had a pinprick hole in it in the stopper, which was filled with just normal saline. The other bottle was missing altogether. The missing bottle would mysteriously be found months later, apparently full, but also with 2 prick marks in the stopper. After analyzing the contents of that bottle, it would also be found that it was just normal saline. Other records found that Holland ordered another bottle of the medication, succinylcholine, which would never be entered into the inventory. There was no evidence that Holland actually ordered it, though. It could have just been Jones posing as Holland, but there's no proof of that either. So oftentimes, Holland and Jones would be alongside the patients that would be rushed to the ER, and it was told that they would start giving orders to the ER doctors. Eventually, Holland's privileges to the ER were revoked. The doctors at the ER would often wonder how the two claimed to be so knowledgeable about the medication, with so many cases going to the ER from her clinic. It wouldn't be until an ER anesthesiologist, Dr. Frank Bradley, would recognize the behavior of one of Holland's admits. He noted that they had the same behavior as patients he had seen in the OR coming out of succinylcholine. On October 12, 1982, the Kerr County Grand Jury would organize a hearing of the cases of all 8 children that had developed problems causing emergency situations at Holland's clinic, as well as the death of 15-month-old Chelsea McClellan. When the body was exhumed, it was also determined that an overdose of succinylcholine was the cause of death. Chelsea's body wasn't the only body that was exhumed. The prosecution of the Kerr County was suspicious of Jones for a while and would exhume the other bodies of the children that had died in Holland's care. Tests were ran and the same things as Chelsea's body was discovered. High levels of succinylcholine were found. In February of 1983, another investigation would be conducted in San Antonio of the suspicious deaths of 47 other children at Bexar Hospital within the 4-year period that Janine Jones was employed. Not only did Jones use succinylcholine, she would also inject her patients with dioxin and heparin. I'm not an expert about the different drugs and medications. However, from what I was able to find, it is that These medications are known to cause heart paralysis when given in large quantities and are overdosed on them. There were many children that wouldn't survive the initial attack, and when their hearts stopped, they wouldn't be able to be revived. Although the exact number is not known, it is speculated that between 46 and up to as many as 60 children were murdered by Janine Jones. The total number is unknown because Bayer Hospital reportedly destroyed all of the files and reports from Jones's times. It was speculated that they did this to avoid bad publicity. It was also reported that Bayer Hospital would shred all of their documents and reports from 1984, including those that would be subpoenaed by the grand jury for trial. Theories behind why she would inject children with these medications was to be a hero, as we mentioned earlier, the savior complex. And she wanted to be the one that knew exactly what was wrong when she came in and be the one to save them and reverse the reactions that the children were having to these medications and revive them. However, she failed and was unable to revive them. With all the evidence against Jones, she was arrested. When she was arrested, it was reported that she stated that the reason she made more kids sick was so that the county would open new pediatric ICU in Kerrville. I don't buy that for a second, and I don't think the authorities did either. On February 15th, 1984, Jones was convicted for Chelsea McClellan's murder. She would receive the maximum sentence of 99 years. In a second trial on October 24th, 1984, she would receive a sentence of 60 years for the attempted murder of Rolando Jones, who was 4 weeks old. Both sentences were to be served concurrently. However, because of a law in Texas that was to help with overcrowding in prisons, there was a law that requires the mandatory release of prisoners, including those violent offenders such as Jones. This law would allow Jones to go up for parole in 2017, which she would be denied, followed by the mandatory release in 2018, which would only be about a third of her original sentence. In 2015, Bexar County's DA Nico LaHood formed a task force to look into the alleged crimes that Jones had committed. He wanted to stop the mandatory release in 2018, so good on him. LaHood would indict Jones for the murders of 5 more children, including that of 11-month-old Joshua Sawyer on May 25th, 2017. Jones and her lawyers would file to have new charges against Jones to be dismissed, stating that it violated her rights to a speedy trial. The requests to dismiss the new charges were denied by the courts, starting that the clock for a speedy trial starts when a suspect is indicted for a crime. In April 2018, the request to dismiss the 5 murder indictments against Jones was also denied. Then on January 16th of 2020, in a plea deal, Jones would plead guilty to the murder of 11-month-old Joshua Sawyer that happened on December 12th of 1981, and then the other 4 charges would be dropped. As of now, Janine Jones won't be able to be up for parole until 2037, at which she will be 87 years old. So it's possible that she could get out. However, she could also die in prison if they even grant her parole when she is up for it. There's been a few documentaries about this case and Janine Jones on Discovery Channel and Forensic Files, as well as a television movie called Deadly Medicine, which came out in 1991, who was portrayed by Susan Rutten, and then also by Alicia Bartia in a straight-to-video movie, Mass Murder, which came out in 2002. There was also a couple other TV episodes and docuseries that were also based on Janine Jones. So that concludes this case at the campfire. I know there's more information that I didn't include in this story, as there was a lot of information to cover. All resources used to gather the information for the case include, but not limited to, news articles, reports, documentaries, as well as other sources. I appreciate everyone who has gathered by the campfire with me for this case. Also, if you would like to listen to ad-free shows as well as bonus episodes, and also to get a shout out on the podcast during the most recent episodes, then sign up and join me over at the bonfire. You can find the bonfire over on Patreon, where there are different tiers that you can choose from. As we progress with growth, there will be more tiers that are added. I appreciate all the support from all the listeners and supporters. Also, if you wish to support the show and not necessarily sign up for a subscription, you can support the show with the S'mores Fund through the website campfirecrimechronicles.com. A link will be provided into the show notes. So join me next time in 2 weeks as we gather around the campfire for the next case that we dive into. Remember to sleep with one eye open. This is the Campfire Crime Chronicles, a true crime podcast.